Hey, John, why are you here? I said, I think I got ADHD. And so we checked it out. I do. So it took me a little bit looking back. I was born in Holland in 1940, November the 1st, 1940. So I just turned 84. Academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade three, and I failed grade seven three times in Holland. And then he said, what we're going to do with this guy? Send him to some people said, to the mentally distorted school. And my parents said, no, we'll teach them a trade.
So, John Brink, you are a podcast host of a podcast called On the Brink. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
That's awesome. I'm a podcast host myself, as you can see. And
Right.
we also have something else in common. I was listening to one of your podcasts. I have ADHD as well, and you were diagnosed in your 60s, correct?
Correct, yeah. 62.
That's pretty wild. How was that to? How did that feel to be diagnosed at such a late age?
Well, a couple of things happened, Ricky, is that I bought a book in a bookstore here in Prince George, British Columbia. That's where I've been for 60 years. And the book's title was Driven to Distraction. I don't know why I picked it up. I still have the book. It was written by Dr. Halliwell. And as I opened the book in the bookstore, it was about ADHD. I never even heard of it. And the more I looked into the book, the more I said, oh my God, that's me. And I bought the book January 1997. I was then 57 years old. And that explained a lot of things about me and my past. And so Dr. Halliwell, he has written 18 books, five of them about distraction. He's ADHD as well as dyslexia. So am I. And so that was when I was 57. I started then checking into it through his book, Google, finding out more and more about it. And I came to the impression that although it had suggested that the frequency of occurrence was likely between 8 and 10% of the population, I thought it would be much higher than that. And so the more I got to know about it, then, as you already indicated, I'm a podcaster. My podcast, On the Brink, podcast number 203, is with Dr. Halliwell, who wrote the book against in 2003. I bought it in 2007, and it took me 5 years to go to my doc, who delivered our two daughters, and who was a personal friend. And he said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we checked it out. I do. So it took me a little bit looking back. I was born in Holland in 1940, November the 1st, 1940. So I just turned 84. Academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade three, and I failed grade seven three times in Holland. And then he said, what we're going to do with this guy? Send him to some people said, to the mentally distorted school. And my parents said, no, we'll teach them a trade. And so at 13 years old, I went to a furniture factory and started working in furniture. And then in the evenings, I would go to college to become a furniture maker. But deep down, I always knew, with all the friends that I used to have that were in grade seven, they went to college, university, and on. I knew that I was just as smart as they were, not better than, but just as smart. So I always dreamed of doing something different. And one of the things that had happened, again, for all you guests watching us from around the world, and especially now, is Holland and the rest of Europe were invaded by a dictator, Adolf Hitler, and it was very difficult, very tough, very hard on our family, actually. Uh, my dad was drafted into the Dutch army, and he was last seen in Rotterdam before it was bombed, and which killed thousands of people. And for 5 years, my mom would not know if he lived or died. And I have a brother, 1 year old, 2 years older than me, a sister, 1 year old. And so from the time that I was 4 and 5 years old, especially 2004, Hitler had cut off all the food supply to Holland, and a lot of young kids died, and so did all the people that were vulnerable. And then the other one, the winter of 2004, 2005 in Holland, was the coldest winter on record. And we would go every morning, we would go with gunny sacks into the railroad yards, myself, my brother, my sister, and we would pick up anything edible and burnable to stay warm and to have some food. And the reason that we did, because the Germans wouldn't shoot us, they would, the kick us one in the back, and then we'd be back the following day. So on April the 12th, 1945, we were liberated by the Canadian Army as part of the Allied forces that liberated Europe. And it was the Canadian Army that liberated us April the 12th, 1945. It made such an impression on me that I always knew I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. I was going to go when I was 17. My parents then wouldn't let me. Then was drafted into the Dutch Air Force for 2 years, and then finally went to Canada when I was 23. But I wanted to start with nothing. I had a suitcase, 2 books, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, very little money. And my dad used to work in the lumber. My grandfather was a master carpenter. I worked in furniture. So I wanted to build a lumber mill. But I couldn't speak the language, didn't know, so didn't have a job, obviously. Landed in Montreal, took the train across Canada, 4 days, 5 nights. My God, that's a long way. Landed in Vancouver, big city, went to the immigration department, and there was a German fella. I could speak some German. I did speak English, and I told him what I wanted to do. He said, "Go to Prince George." That's where I am today, 60 years later. It was about 500 miles north of Vancouver, or for a European friends, 800 kilometers. And so that's where I came off the bus. I had my suitcase. I had 3 books, 2 sets of clothes. I counted my money at least 3 times. I had $25.47. But I had always a positive attitude, always had passion. No matter what I do, I give it 125%. And work ethic, I work harder than anybody. Even now, still at 84, I get up at 5:30 in the morning, and then I always make my bed. I always think I'm late. And even today, when I have a cold, I still go to work. And so that's what I do. And so did I build a mill? Yes, I did. And then I did a lot more things in addition to that, but I never felt good about myself. I always felt that I had failed until I walked into that bookstore and picked up that book Driven to Distraction, written by Dr. Halliwell. And then I knew it was ADHD that affected me. And then that was when I was 57 years old. It still took me 5 years to go to my doc and get the diagnosis. So I was 62 when I was diagnosed. So I look back, Ricky, and thinking about from the time that I was 13 to the time I was 62 for 50 years, I was wondering about who am I and why am I different? But I was very successful in business. It's not about that today, but I have 10 different companies. I'm an author. Obviously, I'm very active in podcasting. It's be an in-demand speaker, do a lot of other things. But it was slow for me to get to that point. First, I had to discover about ADHD and all those people that are benefiting from ADHD, I call it, should be watching my podcast, On the Brink, podcast number 203 is with Dr. Halliwell, the one that wrote the book and changed my life. And when I was in discussion with him, he's the expert, not me, other than living it. So I suggested to him that I had learned that the frequency of occurrence was much higher than I initially thought. I thought it would be at least 20%. He said, no, John, it's at least 25%. And I agree with him. Now, the other part about ADHD is that I've been quite successful in business, sitting on a variety of sources of directors, board directors, and have met and interacted with a lot of successful entrepreneurs and business people. And I came to the conclusion, and I suggested this to Dr. Halliwell, that probably 50% of the successful and the operative is successful entrepreneurs, business people are ADHD. He said, no, John, probably more than 75%. And I agree with him. And so it took me 50 years to find out and discover myself. And today I call it a superpower. And so I could not, although it took me a long time to come to peace with it and to know who I am and to know that I'm just as smart as the others, in some cases more so. And then I also started to write books about it. The first book, a lot of people said to me, you're so successful in business, John, you should write a book. Now, writing books is not easy. And so I knew if I didn't start it 5 years ago, it would never happen. So the first book that I wrote is this one, Against All Odds. It took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. Quite successful, actually. And then the more vocal I became about ADHD and other issues relating to that, and felt that I had an obligation to speak out about it, I wrote a book about that, ADHD Unlocked. And it's you can open it up anywhere, go one direction or the other. It's all interesting, very popular. And then I wrote another book. That's the more recent one. I'm going to just share with you, which is very important to me as well. Health, fitness, exercise, very, very important, especially as you get old. And so I wrote a book about living young, dying old. And it's a picture of me, actually.
You
I'm
want to
the
talk
oldest,
about work ethic? Look at them muscles there.
I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. And
That's
I'm
impressive, John.
Yes, and so I qualified in 2018 for the Nationals in Canada and for the Arnolds, and then obviously COVID came, and now again I'm training for the Arnolds again in 2025, and I'm 85. But
Wow.
this is a picture of me. That's how I look.
That's amazing, John. You were talking about work ethic, and I had already, scoped out the cover of that book, and I was like, man, this guy's incredible. I as you're talking and you're talking about lumber mills, British Columbia around that area is, I mean, a great place to put a lumber mill. And man, I was just talking to a fella by the name of Ben Lesser. He's a Holocaust survivor. He's 96 years old, and he had survived 4 concentration camps by the time he was 15 years old.
Oh,
And he had a similar story. When he was liberated by Americans, and he said at that time, he made it as he wanted to come to America. And
yeah.
as you're speaking, I was like, man, that's incredible. The fact that you knew that at an early age and you made it, John, that is amazing in itself. And you speak of work ethic and passion, and all of those things embody what you have accomplished over your 83 years
84.
and 84, excuse me. uh
Since
I
Friday.
I happy birthday.
Well, thank you.
I have ADHD myself, and it's when I was diagnosed, I was 30, 33, 34, something like that. And similar to you, I look back at my life and the things that had happened to me, and the things that I had done, and I had some answers. I had, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense now. And from there, it wasn't that knowing made the difference, because I would have been able to be who I am regardless of knowing ADHD or no ADHD. But it gave me the knowledge and the tools to proceed forward, to figure out how I wanted to proceed with the knowledge that I now have. And like you, I wasn't dumb. I wasn't unintelligent. It's just I couldn't sit through school. I couldn't learn the way the educators wanted me to learn. And that's one of the many reasons why I started the podcast. My boys have ADHD, and I watch them struggle through their coursework in schools and with their grades. And I just keep telling them, that I don't really know why they need that piece of paper to make it through, high school and elementary school. But we do those things. We have to learn, we have to grow, we have to challenge ourselves. And those hardships are often what sculpt and mold us into who we are as adults. And I just like your parents, I want to teach my boys a trade. That way they can use their body and mind as a whole to earn money and be successful as adults.
I believe what is important to know, Ricky, is that even them at a young age to understand it's not a deficiency. It is, in my mind, a superpower. And that means we are very, very good at things that we like. We're not very good at boring sitting in classrooms. And for me, they could talk to me as all day sitting in the classroom and they ask me what did they talk about? I haven't got a clue
I
because I
wasn't paying
really was
attention.
not there mentally. But now what is important to me is to share with others that I had certain qualities that were then not recognized. I was very good at numbers and I'm a very good writer. I have dyslexia as well. I was not a good reader, and still today that is the case. But regardless of that, I've been very successful in all my books that I'm doing. I'm writing another one right now. It's coming out in
Oh,
June
take your
on
time. It's fine.
communications, and so that's me what's important. So the other problem, the challenge that I had, I was already successful in business here, but I was not very good in interaction and communications. And I could, even up to the time that I was 50, I could communicate in a small group in my companies, but not very good outside of that because I didn't have the confidence. And then somebody said to me, "Hey, John, but you come with me to Toastmasters." I said, "Toastmasters? What's that all about?" They said they teach you communications. And so there are probably 450 Toastmaster clubs around North America. There's probably 10 million people, including your communities. There may be 4 or 5 Toastmaster clubs, and probably 10 million people that have participated to different levels in Toastmasters. I stayed in Toastmasters for 10 years. I reached the highest point, becoming a distinguished Toastmaster, a DTM, and that changed my life. And obviously, I'm a very good communicator, even when I have a cold, but that has been a big part of my life. So in my writing and the writing that I do also audio. Takes me longer than most other people, but to me, that is important to do that. And, and then I'm obviously a very good communicator because I think today, I think we just reached on YouTube 600,000 subscribers.
600,000. Yes, I'm actually may have contributed to that. I subscribed myself. I'm very impressed with that number as well.
So, and then I'm doing about 340 or so YouTube or podcasts where I'm the host, and I've done probably 150 to 200 where I'm a guest, and I enjoy that.
I love talking, and I've said this many times on the podcast before. That's one of the reasons, one of the big reasons why I started the podcast is because I love talking. I love talking to people. I love meeting people, and it's not always been like that, John. I've got pretty bad anxiety as well, and I didn't know how to communicate the best with people. I knew I liked talking. I knew I liked interacting with people, meeting people, but I just didn't know how to interact with them, how to talk with them. And I found that more often than not, when I have difficulties in a conversation, it's because I'm not tuned in.
Right,
It's because I'm not actively listening. And
right.
so sometimes I have to, in the middle of a conversation, I'm sorry, what was that? I wasn't paying attention. And some people might think it's kind of rude or something, but I'm honest about it. I'm the way I feel is if we can be honest and let people know how we feel, it'll eliminate a lot of misunderstandings.
Right.
And so that's the biggest reason why I'm very honest about it. But active listening, do you struggle with active listening in the middle of conversations sometimes when you're on your podcast?
Let me say this, Ricky, that yes, I do, and yes, I did, but not so much now. You know what changed it?
What's that?
Toastmasters. Toastmasters, I don't know if you are familiar with it.
Never heard
You
of it.
should, no, you should go Google it because you will find them all around you, even in your community. Absolutely. Toastmasters, clubs, and there are probably 450,000 around the world. And so what does that do, Toastmasters? It teaches you not to become a speaker, but first and foremost, become a good listener. And then secondly, what it does, it teaches you to speak on your feet. Ask the question, stand up, respond. And then thirdly, it teaches you to speak about structures and then become a good speaker. I'm a very good speaker because of Toastmasters. The other part that I have a quality that not many people have, especially with ADHD, for the reasons that you mentioned, is that I'm a storyteller. That's what I do in my books. That's what I do in my podcast. That's who I am. But when initially I had anxiety, lack confidence, the first Toastmasters meeting that I went to, I said to the people that took me, ex-sister-in-law actually, and I said, oh, she said, come with me to Toastmasters. I said, okay, but are you going to do that? They're not, I don't have to say anything. No, no, just sit there, listen. And then halfway through the meeting, somebody stood up and they said, hey, John, tell us all about you. I said, oh my God, I'll never go back here. I could have crawled out of there on hands and knees, but I didn't. I stayed for 10 years and I got to the point that helped me with my ADHD of phasing out. It taught me all those kind of things. And so it complemented. So between, if I look back, when I was 5 years old, the Canadian soldiers liberating us made such an impression on me. I knew I would go to the land of my heroes, and I did. Then coming here, I was going to build a lumber mill, and I did. But still, I did not have that confidence. And then, by pure coincidence, somebody taking me to Toastmasters, that changed my life. And then, as a result of all of that, and then finding out that I had ADHD, and when I was 62, that changed my life. And since that time, I've become an author, a very frequent presenter all over the place. And then obviously, I'm very active in uh, podcasting around the world.
So yeah, I am just I need to get a hold of something like that. There's a Toastmasters club about an hour away from my house. I just looked it up, and improv classes are something a few of friends of mine have suggested to me. Not just because it's quick. It's nice to think on your feet and be able to respond quickly, but also because public speaking with the podcast, learning active listening, stuff like that. So I definitely need to check that out because it's as you're speaking about ADHD and the superpower side of ADHD, I often think of that because I'm so good at a lot of the things that I do, but I don't have that confidence in myself. And I don't have, I call it um, imposter syndrome. I feel like I have imposter syndrome sometimes. And because I'm aware of that, maybe it's not. I don't know. But I often feel like I'm not good enough or I'm not smart enough or other people are better at this than I am. So I'm just going to fade away. I'm just going to back away. And as I get older and more comfortable with my diagnosis, it's like, no, this is a superpower because like I most people often don't think before they speak. And I almost have to think before I speak because if I don't, then whatever I'm thinking is going to come out of my mouth. And it's so fun sometimes to it's so fun sometimes to explain to folks like my ADHD does not slow me down. It does not hinder me. It does cause interpersonal relationship issues sometimes, but it doesn't hinder me from doing the things that I need to do. If anything, it helps me.
So there's maybe one link that I would suggest to you from my experience is that Toastmasters was a great, great help to me because it put me into a situation. I had anxiety. I didn't feel I was good enough, not better. And so we're now obviously at a late stage because of all the things that happened, the book, the Toastmastering, that I have an amazing memory. I do, and I'm very good at numbers. And so, but I'm not good at reading because I had dyslexia. So I think it was last week or so, I did a presentation in Vancouver. I don't do too many of them. It takes me a lot of time to be away from my companies because it takes me a day and a half, 2 days if I do presentation in the States or in southern BC. But what was unique about me and my background is that, likely because of all those things that I said, in particular Toastmasters, is that, and it's also a reason that I'm very good at podcasting. And I can say that to you without being snobbish about it, but you know the point. Because I don't know what's going to happen on podcasting. I have no idea. And I've done about 350 of them or so, and but all an hour long, and we never added anything virtually. We put it online the same day or the following morning. And the other part that I have about it is the same when I give presentations in front of 300 people, which I did last week. And I'm doing another one actually here at a school with probably 600 or 700 kids about the Liberation and Remembrance Day. I do that every year. But uh, so I know that when I get up and I stand in front of all those people, I have a little bit of anxiety because you're supposed to. But in terms of, I have no fear that I don't know what I'm going to speak about it. I don't print it out because I'm not a good reader. And so, but I have an excellent memory and things will always come to me. They will. And so I have gained that confidence likely substantially through Toastmasters. Standing up, speaking out on topics. Other one is knowing being a good speaker and presenter is being a good speaker is, I always say, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. It's kind of the structure of presenting in a way. The other one is that I know I can, at one time I was like you. I have like squirrels are running through my brain. And as I talk about one topic, another one comes up, another one. And before you know, say, what the hell is he talking about? I don't have that. And it is Toastmasters and other things and practice likely that taught me. Same with being part of close to 500 podcasts, 350 of them where I'm hosting. But I've never been to the point where even sometimes having guests that as I interact and wait for them, they don't say anything. And then I have to make sure that, so those kind of situations I'm used to. I always make it work.
Yeah, sometimes
And
that's
in a
I
lot of
struggle.
cases,
Go ahead.
yeah, in a lot of cases, even in the last couple of days, I think I had twice somebody say to me, just today, Scott, right? Two just today, two just today. She said, I talked about ADHD and I talk about all stuff that I talk about, right? Not only about ADHD, but about relationships, blah, 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 whatever. And so I then started going through it with ADHD. She said, it's interesting that you say that because my sons have ADHD. And I said, oh, okay. So when did you diagnose? And she told me this story. And then it took another 15, 20 minutes into the podcast when she said, I was diagnosed to ADHD. I said, oh, okay.
It
So,
makes sense.
she was still at the point of stigma to a certain extent and looking at it, and I say it should not be. So if you're going to communicate this to young people in particular, I did a presentation on one of the schools here a couple of weeks ago, I guess. And I brought them all a book of my ADHD about how many people were there? 80, 90. Yeah, somewhere around 100 or so. And I do that every so often. Then I talked about ADHD, and it's unbelievable how many come up to me afterwards and say, I'm ADHD as well, and blah, blah, blah. And so I feel I have an obligation to do that. The other book that I did is, and that's what I talk to young people about, is that as they go to university or college, then I say, what you going to do after you're done? You say, I don't know. I said, it's very important that you kind of get a direction because what you do for the rest of your life, you take it home with you. And it is very, very important that you have a sense of satisfaction. And then I heard the program of the US television station where they said that, and I think Canada is the same, 75% of the people that work do not like their jobs. And probably 70% of the 75% are looking for another job. So what I say is that if you're young, think about what you may want to do. You want to be a truck driver, talk to truckers that do that for a profession. They don't mind talking to you. If you want to be a contractor, build houses, electrician, talk to them, or you want to be a lawyer, or you want to be a dog, or for that matter, an entrepreneur. And so I wrote a book about that as well. Finding your passion, living the dream, and saying that since I'm 84 now, started working in a furniture factory when I was 13. I've worked for 71 years and saying, okay, John, are you living the dream? I am. Every day to me is a special day.
Hell yeah. You can really tell when somebody's happy doing what they do when they're, 84 and still doing it.
Exactly.
That's amazing. And going back to the anxiety in public speaking, I do struggle sometimes with in the middle of podcast knowing what to say when that those awkward silences happen. And so I come right out and say, "Hey, I have ADHD. Sometimes it's difficult to stay on task. Sometimes I don't always know what to say." And usually being honest about it kind of breaks up the stigma, I guess, and helps that awkward silence. But that is something I struggle with, and I work on that almost daily. I work on staying. For me, it's active listening. It's all about active listening. And going back to that anxiety part of it, I use that anxiety as fuel. And for a lack of a better term, I get some sort of high I feel off of that anxiety. And I push myself to do things that make me uncomfortable. And I feel like I do that not only to uh, not only to experience those things, but because it makes me feel good after I'm done doing those things. After I've pushed myself as hard as I, thought I could, and in the middle of things, oh, I'm dying, or this is such a struggle talking to this person. No matter what I'm doing, I always get that deep satisfaction from facing that anxiety and working through it. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, I do, but it doesn't bother me because that was the benefit of, and as you go, you should go to a meeting of those Toastmaster clubs. There are several around you. Just sit there first, but then participate in it, and you will see amazingly what it will do for you, and it will serve you well. I interview a lot of people that are very, very smart, very, very bright on several issues. I never have anxiety about my ability to interact with them is because of my experience is different than theirs. But at the same time, I'm spend a lot of time of knowing things around me. And so as I get ready for the podcast, I do about probably usually about four a week or so of where I'm podcasting host, and then I may do another couple where I'm a guest. And I never have anxiety about no matter who it is or what they do. And the topics may be totally different one over the other. And as you likely have seen in my podcast, I do it in all kinds of different areas. But I never have anxiety that I will not find the words to interact, or if the podcast guest is not as interactive as I like them to be after we have a discussion. And now it's hers or his turn to say something, and he or she doesn't, then I'm always ready for that. And so that then builds that confidence. But you will get to that and you will feel good about it because that's what I believe for me at least. I'm very good at that. I'm a very good communicator. I have an amazing memory and and as I go into a podcast, either as a guest or a host, I may look at, I got your bio here, very short one, and I have a pretty good idea of who you are. You're a storyteller like me. ADHD has played a part in your life, personally, your kids, and but it also has created challenges, and you're still trying to sort all of that out. But you're well on the way in doing that, in my opinion, Ricky, is that podcasting will help you in that process. But to get exposure to Toastmasters may help because it forces you in a way to become a good listener because what you're asked to do is evaluate somebody else's presentation. That means you have to listen. Then the other section of Toastmasters is where there are topics that somebody says, Ricky, blah, blah, blah. I bought, hypothetically speaking, an automobile, but there's a problem with it. Tell me what I should do about it. Now you want to give a coherent response in some
Well,
form of.
if it were me and I bought a vehicle and I was having issues with it, this is what I would do. I would go back to the dealership where I bought it, see if they can help me out, see if I can fix it up, or, if there's something they can do. And if there's nothing they can do, take it to a mechanic shop.
And then you sit down again. Now you responded to the question that somebody asked you on the group. And then at the same time, you think about questions that you may direct to somebody else. And then you get ready to do, there is a number of speeches in the early stages, a topic that they say, write a speech about this, meaning tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, an opening, a structure, all of those kind of things. But so what I'm saying is simply is it helps the process of becoming a good listener, thinking on your feet, and then what the real result is becoming a good presenter in a coherent fashion, especially when you're ADHD.
That's awesome. For the life of me, I can't think of a specific instance where I've had to come up with something like that on the fly as, like part of a group or part of a class or something like that. I can't think of a good example where I've made it work. But I do have conversations in my everyday life where I'm conversing with my kids. They have an issue. I have to think on the fly sometimes when I'm dealing with those kind of things, and I often find myself in a position where I have to pause for a few seconds before I respond, and I have to think about that response that I'm going to give and make sure they understand it, make sure I understand it as I'm telling them. And I've definitely got to check out the Toastmasters clubs because, like I said, there's one within an hour of my house. So it's actually it's about 45 minutes. So I couldn't be happier with the way this conversation has progressed itself. And I've I've got to find a way in the very beginning of a conversation to relate with my guests. And most oftentimes that's usually through politics or children, coffee, you know, those opening icebreakers is a good way to, get to know somebody for a few minutes and talk with them for a few minutes and have something else to build that conversation upon, especially if you're just meeting somebody like this. And I absolutely agree that I need to check out these Toastmasters Club. I've never heard of them before.
Yeah, it's very popular. It's probably 10 million people around the world. There is probably 450,000 clubs around North America. I bet you there is in what city are you in?
St. Joseph, Missouri, but we're about an hour north of Kansas City.
Yeah, so there is probably all around you, there's probably 10 clubs, at least that. But
There's
I would,
probably actually one in the city I live in.
yeah. And so what I'm saying, it's all around you, and but you will find it interesting. What I find is that initially I had the same feelings as you do, is how do you start a conversation? But when, but a lot of times the people that you would like to talk to have the same anxiety likely that you have. And the more you reach out, the more comfortable they will become in interacting.
Yes, that's amazing that you brought that up. I do find that a lot that people are just people. The people that I'm reaching out to be on the podcast, they're people just like me, and a lot of them started out just like me, having those same anxieties of cold reaching out. And actually, as a matter of fact, Scott had reached out to me, and we had started interacting, and I was, as soon as he reached out, I knew I was going to talk to you. I was like, yes, I absolutely want to talk to John because of your childhood and your story, how you immigrated to Canada. And I wanted to talk about all of that. And then I found out that you have ADHD, and then we have a lot of things in common as far as podcasting and all that stuff goes. And I was like, yeah, I absolutely want to talk to John. And I don't have anybody to reach out to other people for me. It's just me and my wife that run this thing. And my wife, bless her heart, she works full time, two jobs, and I'm a stay at home dad. So it's really kind of on me. And reaching out to folks, I have to keep that in mind all the time. Hey, they're people just like you. Don't be scared. Don't be nervous. Throw it out there. If you get a no, that's fine. You can build on the next yes. So I find that as well in my podcasting life that I have to constantly remind myself, hey, these are people just like you.
Exactly. And the more you do, the more comfortable you will feel, the bigger your circle will become. And so the that's what I found anyway, so yeah.
Communication for me is it's kind of weird. I love to communicate, but I communicate better like this than over emails. It's pretty hard for me to say what I want to say in an email, make it short, concise, and to the point. And I that's one thing that I do not like doing. I don't like email. I don't like social media. I love the face-to-face interactions.
Right.
And it's just, for me, it's a lot easier. There's context there, and in the emails and stuff there is context missing there. How do the Toastmasters clubs help you with communication outside of verbal communication?
Well, what I said to you earlier, that I'm a storyteller. That's what my books are about, storyteller. It's not about laying out structurally facts of some sort. It tells a story. And that's what Toastmasters has have helped me with, to be coherent about it and have structure to it. So it makes it interesting to others. If I write it, speak it, or podcast it, through all the things that I do, it has structure. And and at the same time, I try to interact with the person that I'm interacting with, if it is you or if it is a group of a couple of hundred people or the kids next Friday.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've got to check it out. And that's another thing that I've actually got to work on myself is communication through email. I'm terrible about it. I some of these messages that I have to send out, I feel like I'm constantly talking all the time, and it's not necessarily the things I want to do. I want to do this. This is what I want to do, but the preparation for podcasting is there's several communications that have to happen before you get to the recording stage, and then after the recording stage there's several more communications that have to happen. And I constantly feel like I'm talking to people from the time I wake up till the time I go to bed, and it's all in preparation for this.
I,
And I have to I have to remind myself that it's okay to not communicate in the best way, but to be honest about it and be honest that I'm working on communication. I apologize for not communicating very well or not communicating at all. Like last week was very difficult for me because I don't figure out, I don't do my own scheduling. My wife does my scheduling for me, and I I set up the schedules and tell her, and she does my calendar for me. That way, there is no overlap between her schedule, my schedule,
right,
and the kids' schedules.
right,
So she handles them all. And I have to remind myself all the time that, like, look, these people are probably just like me. They probably have to talk to a million people just like me. So just explain it to them like, hey, I'm not the best communicator, but here we go. And it does work. It absolutely helps in getting a rapport built. Just to something as simple as a rapport or a relationship with who I'm talking to. It's very easy to do that and just be honest. And so last week, it was very difficult for me to communicate with other folks because I was in a state of like perpetual freeze all week last week because my studio is all torn apart. My equipment is all out here in the main house instead of in the studio, and I struggled so much with not knowing what to say or how to say it. And so I just didn't. And I was communicating back and forth with Scott, not last week, but the week before. And then on Monday, I sent him an email and said, "Hey, I apologize. I'm not the best communicator. My stuff's still torn up. I'm gonna be able to do the show, but it's gonna not be in my regular studio." And those communications for me, I feel like that's ADHD and me not understanding how to communicate that, how to work around the ADHD aspect of the perpetual freeze, the I'm so overwhelmed, so I don't do anything. Do you ever struggle with that, or have you ever struggled with that?
probably all before Toastmasters, I would say. No, I don't. The I'm writing books. I have 10 companies. I'm just giving you for a background so you have an idea what goes on in my life. I have 10 different companies. I do a lot of podcasting. I said that already. I do other public presentations. And so I'm a busy guy, lots of stuff happening. And so a lot of people say to me, how do you do it all? I say it's because of ADHD. That's how we do it. Is that, but the one suggestion I would have for you is you're a good communicator. That's my impression. And the less you talk about that it is not good or not as good as you think it should be, I wouldn't do that. I would say you are good already at what you're doing. Focus on that. Do not have the feeling that you have to apologize to anybody because you know, I have an accent. I have ADHD. I'm and on and on and on and on. But I I do a good job of podcasting. I do a good job of writing. I like my books. I bet you they will sell millions of copies. I have the confidence. I'm not better than, but I'm good at what I do. And I would recommend to you two things. Go sit into a Toastmasters meeting. And then the other one is do not be apologetic for not being a good communicator, because then you are convincing yourself of something that's negative. And I
Oh,
don't
yeah. It's almost like setting myself up for failure.
Yeah,
Would you agree?
yeah. No, you can't do that. You're good at what you're doing. Stay the course. Be confident in terms of makes it work. Because I can't see anything until you keep talking about it as that, then you create the problem that you do not have at this point. You're still working on becoming better at it. You're doing more things at it, and your studio looks fine, looks no different than other people's. And I wouldn't say much about all of that kind of stuff. Just do your stuff, do it your way, tell the stories, and then from there and then polish up a little bit by going to Toastmasters. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but at least you got the experience. Look it up. And Toastmasters, what makes somebody good at it is, especially for somebody with ADHD, become a good listener. And so that's what I do. I try not to drift away or go into other areas. All of that I can, and I have done that in the past, but I don't do it now. I don't even think about it. I know what will happen. I know I'm going to be good at it. And no matter what problem occurs, I'm just going to go forward, no matter what happens.
That's very insightful, John. Thank you very much. I think that's a good place to leave this conversation. I'm actually going to reach out to you again. I'm gonna speak to Scott. Probably not today. Probably tomorrow. I'll reach out to Scott and we'll set something up again. I'd like to do this again in my regular studio, and we'll be a little bit more comfortable. I'm going to check into this Toastmasters club as well, and we'll just we'll meet again and we'll have a great conversation again. This has been wonderful. The the insights that you have on ADHD, book writing, speaking, it's been an incredible conversation. Thank you very much, John.
Also, look at my podcast 203 with Dr. Halliwell.
Absolutely. I will definitely do that. And we're going to link in the description, your website, your YouTube channel. Everybody
Yeah,
go check out John's podcast, On the Brink. It's a
yeah, and look
I've
at the
listened
other
to one
one,
already. So it's
John A. Brink, like an Adam or Aaron, johnabrink.com. And that will have all the things on it that I'm doing.
awesome, John. And when we speak again, I would like to talk a little bit more about World War II in Holland, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Until next time, we'll see you guys.
Excellent.
Bye.
Thanks, Ricky. Take care. Bye bye.